Good evening and welcome to the Athenaeum of Philadelphia. It's so wonderful to virtually be here with all of you tonight. I don't know that if you've ever come to a virtual program or even a live program at the Athenaeum with this many people in our panel. This is an exciting program that our curator, Bruce Laverty, helped organize, and we're excited to have you here tonight. I'm Beth Hessel, the executive director. We have our wonderful panel up here of artists and historians, architects and preservationists and politicians and doers and makers and dreamers. People like you who see the city, the place we live in different and special ways. This program is related to our ongoing exhibit celebrating the photography of the late photographer Jerome Lukowicz, an amazing collection of photographs of the city that invite us to look in new ways at the city in which we live. This exhibit, I want to let you all know, has been extended through May 26th, so it is going to be open for another month if you haven't had a chance to see it. Hopefully, after attending tonight's program, you will want to go see the exhibit for your first time or your fifth time and revel in what you find. We're so delighted to have you here. If you are new to the Athenaeum and have never visited before, I hope you will visit more of our programs. You will come and see us and experience our own space as well and consider becoming a member, because we are a community of people who love to learn and to engage with one another with our endless curiosity for life and learning. So welcome. I'd like to turn over the program now to our curator, Bruce Laverty, who will be introducing each of our illustrious panelists, and hope you enjoy the show.
Okay, thank you, Beth. Tess, do we have Oscar yet? Great, we do? Okay.
Hold on, let me check. It's not simple to
okay.
check this.
Let me introduce him while you're checking, and then we can come back. Or
I don't see it. His name's not listed. So.
Okay, well then we'll skip over him and come back to him when he comes in. I did send a copy of the link to Oscar and Aaron. So Laura, you'll be up then. I'd like to introduce Laura Stroffolino. She has worked in libraries, archives, and special collections in Philadelphia for over 20 years. Since 2015, Laura has been the curator of the print and picture collection at the Free Library of Philadelphia. The collection is home to a variety of graphic materials, including fine arts, prints, photographs, drawings, artist books, as well as a large collection of images of Philadelphia. And Laura, there we are.
Thank you, Bruce. Francis Albert Sinatra may have sung odes to Chicago and New York, but Philadelphia has always loved the voice. After Sinatra died in May 1998, the Philadelphia Daily News helped raise the money for this 4-story color mural at Broad and Wharton Streets, which was completed and dedicated on November 13th, 1999. By July 2011, a new 3-story building covered much of the mural, and in 2013, the National Guard 3rd Regiment Armory building the mural was on was demolished. When this photo was taken, payphones were easy to find, gas was $1.27 a gallon, and the Tullantine Community Center hosted bingo every Thursday and Sunday at 7 p.m. You can see City Hall 12 blocks to the north, but you can't see the hazy smoke inside the bingo hall, the caller calling out G52, or the player who doesn't need chips or a dab ink marker because he has the numbers memorized on all 36 of his bingo cards. But take a look at the people captured in the sunlight. There's a woman in an ankle-length coat on the sidewalk and a man in a suit pumping his own gas. Maybe his radio is playing the sounds of Sinatra with Sid Mark. In the book Portraits of the City, there's a quote by Roland Barthes about undertaking a semiology of the city. He says, quote, "It will require many of us to attempt to decipher the city where we are, beginning, if necessary, with a personal report," end quote. When I was asked to choose a photo for tonight's event, I didn't pick an image I'd like to have on my wall or one of a historic building I could research. I picked the one I felt a connection to, a photo with which I could give a personal report. It's been 26 years since that Sunday night I played bingo at Tullantine, but I still remember the thick smoke and the serious players who noticed when I didn't catch one of the bingo numbers on my cards. Now, I think I've reached the end of my 2 minutes. So as the chairman of the board sings in Angel Eyes, excuse me while I disappear.
Thank you, Laura. Next we have Betsy Manning. Betsy is a native Philadelphian, and she oversees photo and video within Temple's marketing and communications department. Since the mid-1990s, she's photographed hundreds of buildings in the region, ones that she feels are underappreciated, but many others describe as, quote, ugly.
Thanks, Bruce. Laura, that's a tough act to follow. I did not have this such a beautiful preparation. I just have some notes, but maybe that reflects the subject matter pretty well, because what I like about this the supermarket at 6th and Girard is that it's just such a beautiful mess, and I think it's a perfect way to photograph a building like this, especially row houses. I like to see them head on, and that's the perfect composition. I think this, the sky is so gray and so cloudy, it almost looks like a cutout. It almost looks like the sky has just been completely separated from the building. I like that the building is there's so much to see, and you do lose, the only thing that you lose in this composition is that vertical sign that says find fair, but it doesn't matter because there's so much else to see. I like that it looks like a collage or a bulletin board, and that each rectangle is a frame for some kind of art. And I like this. This is the kind of, I would choose this for my wall, because every time I would walk past, I would have something to see. And I like that there's like one thing, if I looked at it this so long, I noticed that there's a pigeon up in the very top of the building. And I like that how this building has changed over the years, because it's been something that I've looked at, although never photographed. So I think it's brilliant that Jerome did. I like that it has a typical, this is from what I've seen of Jerome's work, I like that he's always got the half a car composition. I see that a lot. I see half a car on one end and half a car on the other end, sometimes a whole car in the middle. I love that. I don't know what else to say about this, except that these are the messy kinds of photos that I just love to look at. It's like an advent calendar to me. It looks like you want to just open these. You want to open each square. I love all the it was a really tough choice for me. There are a few others that I really liked a lot too, but this is the one that I think is the one I'd like to look at the most often. That's it from me.
Thank you, Betsy. Has Aaron come in yet, Tess?
Let me check. I do not see him. No.
Okay, we'll move on then. Then I'll ask Joe Elliot to come forward. Joe is a professor of art emeritus from Muhlenberg College, and he is currently a lecturer in the Historic Preservation Program at the University of Pennsylvania. He has photographed many properties for HABS and HAER, the Historic American Building Survey and Engineering Record, and his books and exhibits include Bethlehem Steel, Palazzos of Power, and Philadelphia Finding the Hidden City. The last two of which actually appeared on the walls of the gallery at the Athenaeum. Joe?
Thank you, Bruce. I'm talking about this picture called the Lonely Logan Row House. Just in general, I want to say that all of this work by Jerome is what I think of as classic 4x5 view camera, black and white architectural photography. And the characteristics of that are, it's very formal. The buildings stand up straight. It's simple. It's direct. The lighting is very strong. It's stark in this case, and the blacks are deep. The prints and the book are absolutely beautifully printed in that kind of rich tonality you can get out of black and white negatives. So it's his work is very authoritative in that way. It's also timeless. It shot mostly in the 2000s and the 2010s. But it goes back, you look at Bernice Abbott from the 1930s, photographing changing New York with a similar camera, or Richard Nickel in Chicago in the 60s and 70s, documenting the great losses of architecture there. So Jerome has decided when he did this to use this classic format, this classic material, and he used it beautifully. So talking about this shot, as I said, is typical. It's very on axis. It's evenly framed. It's got the trees balancing on each side. But you notice that he shot this with a wide angle lens, which means that the perspective is greater than it would be than if you had a more normal or a longer lens. The trees are huge. The house starts to look small in the frame. And if we look far enough back, we see the line of the still standing row houses at the outside, at the edge of this whole area. The nature, so we have nature here dominant, largely trying to survive here in this environment, but the branches are bare. I guess the leaves are just coming out. The house itself is trying to survive. It's a survivor so far, but it's missing a column. And we wonder, is it still inhabited? Is the family there holding out against this kind of inexorable loss of the neighborhood? It's a very uncomfortable picture. It's not cozy. It's not homey at all. And so what is the message we get from this? Well, we might say it's the classic standard message of urban decay, the loss of industry and the loss of income over the course of the 50s, 60s, and 70s. We could easily say that's what this picture is about. But there's a backstory here. This is shot in Logan Triangle, which is an area that was formerly flowing with the Wingohocking Creek. It was filled in the early 20th century to make flat land for housing, but they cut some corners there. They filled it with coal ash from leftover power plant ash or housing, or a lot of coal ash was floating around in the early 20th century. So they thought, well, hey, why not? Let's use this stuff. Well, the problem with coal ash is it sunk, it shrunk, it was not stable. It was a cheap way to go instead of putting gravel or rock in to fill that landscape. What was the result? Well, by 1959 and then in 1986, there were explosions from broken gas mains due to that sinking landscape. The area was condemned and bought up by public domain by the city, and all the houses were removed except for this last one. Now, if you go there now, this one is also gone. It's completely still a blank landscape. So it's kind of a testament or an evidence of urban misplanning, shortcuts, corruption, perhaps, in cutting corners to get this development done. And the people who suffered from it were the residents over time, who had no idea what would happen to these houses. So it's unfortunately one of the typical stories of urban planning in Philadelphia. Thank you. That's all I have to say.
Thank you, Joe. Our next speaker is Sam Katz. And if you look up Sam's entry in Wikipedia, it identifies him as an American politician. But that's not why we invited him tonight. He has earned his spot on our panel here because of his love of Philadelphia's history. He is the executive producer of History Making Productions and its series Philadelphia, the Great Experiment. Sam?
Thank you, Bruce. Good evening, everybody. And I picked this photograph by Jerome because I worked 2 blocks away from the Willow Street steam power station for about a decade. And long before that, wondered why we hadn't figured out a way to do something about it. This photograph, I don't think that Jerome did things in Photoshop, but to look at this building and not see graffiti all over it is rather stark and surprising. Joe mentioned coal ash as the choice of landfill on which Logan, that neighborhood was built. Well, this is one of the places where that coal ash would have come from. And I picked this because I'm always interested and reminded that while we primarily celebrate Philadelphia as an 18th century city, it really is a 19th century industrial city. This plant was originally built by the Philadelphia Electric Company, which is a descendant of Edison Electric, which merged with one of several enterprises that Peter A.B. Widener and William Elkins and others owned in the city in the 19th century. And it served to generate steam. And one of the Philadelphia's continuing anomalies and holdovers from the industrial past is the fact that we still have a steam system. I think it was sold by PECO to a subsidiary of Trigen, and it was just resold recently to a company called Victory, which is trying to revitalize the steam distribution in Philadelphia and is competing rather fiercely, as many of you may know from reading the paper, with the Philadelphia Gas Works. The coal that was delivered to this plant was on the Reading system, and some portions of that arguably are today now the rail park over at 13th to 11th in Callow Hill. One of the last things I want to comment about is having taken Harry Kyriakidis's tour many years ago, the land between Vine Street and Spring Garden and River to River was held in trust for the Penn family and had the title Springettsbury Manor, named after Penn's first wife, Julie Elmo Springett. The interesting aspect of it is if you walk from river to river, up Callow Hill or up any of the other small streets, from block to block, you see something dramatically different because there was never any planning here. The city actually, the Penns didn't actually sell the land until the late 18th century. And it's just all kinds of land uses that one does not relate well to the other. This system served, this production plant served a significant portion of the area, and the steam system continues to do so today. So those are my thoughts.
Thank you, Sam. Our next speaker is Vincent Feldman. He is an architectural photographer and a master lecturer in photography at UArts. In 2015, the Athenaeum exhibited selected photos from his wonderful book, City Abandoned, Charting the Loss of Civic Institutions in Philadelphia. Vince?
Yeah, hi. You know, I looked through Jerome's work and I saw so much stuff. So much of his work overlaps with mine, and so many things are familiar to me. And I wanted to pick images that I had thought of taking, but I never got. And there were quite a few. One of them was this one. This is the American Baptist Publication Society building, a long name. Another one was just a church with I think it's on the exhibit. I'm not sure if it's an exhibit, but it's a little cross of a church in the back that's about 1.5 blocks from my house that, again, I don't have a photograph of. You know, the Meridian building once took this space, I believe. That was a big disaster in Philadelphia's long list of national disasters that, you know, got international attention. And when that building was finally removed after years of staying as a hulk, as a ruin, and I photographed parts of that, it revealed this ensemble of buildings and the Baptist Publication Building, which I've always loved, and I've always wished to photograph it like this. And I guess in my way, I just would see that building and I didn't recognize the incredible ensemble which Jerome has revealed here, which was his way of seeing this freshly, which wasn't in my picture in my mind that I had, the picture not taken. And I just love the way he photographed this, again, straight on, which is a way I love to see buildings very directly, but he created a collage of Center City and of the vision of, I always like to think of Philadelphia, boy, if the developers hadn't done what they've gotten away with, we'd have a Paris of the United States. And this gives a glimpse of what that would be like walking through Philadelphia. And it still is today, you can imagine it. But the disaster that was the Meridian building left to destruction of the other side of the block, not through the fire, but through the simple neglect of the city not resolving what was, and there's also an insurance problem. But there was just the beauty of these ensemble, and he captured it in a way that reveals all this texture, which is why I love walking around Center City, and I believe is why we love so much 19th century architecture, and it is the architecture of this city that really comes through, and it's what grabs our eyes. We get our eyes, and I don't know, it's something to tactilely run our eyes over, and seeing the Bellevue in the background and all the details there. I just love this picture, although I probably would have just cut that little building out of the Baptist building and isolated it. And again, that's how I would see it in my mind, but then this is a great revelation for me. So that's what I'd like to say.
Thank you, Vince. Our next speaker is Michele Foster Lucas. Michele was born in Philadelphia, and she now resides in Pennsauken, New Jersey. She is a mixed media artist, and by God's grace, she has been creating art since she was a child. She has exhibited her work at the Athenaeum of Philadelphia, and is a longtime friend of the Athenaeum. Michele.
Hi, I picked number 19 because of the brickwork. That's the first thing that drew my eye in. And then when I looked a little closer and I saw the people on top, and I thought, what are they doing? I mean, I don't know the history of the building. I don't know what's underneath of it and all that stuff. But what drew my eye was that I can't see clearly what's going on there, but it looks like they're interacting with each other. And I thought, wow, well, I wonder what they're doing and what's that mean, you know? And then it looks like a lot of symbolism when you look at all the diamonds that are in the brickwork. And I don't know what the symbolism means, but I recognize some of them that I don't know what they mean. And so I thought, wow, this probably has like a real history behind the whole building. And the windows, the round windows, made it look beautiful to me when I first looked at it. And then I looked, was studying a little bit, and I says, well, that window beneath doesn't look like it fits there. Now it may, like I said, I don't know the history of the building, but I said, this window doesn't look like it fits. And then I'm looking at the window and I hadn't seen earlier, but it says plays and players on the building. And I thought, I wonder what that means. Is this a theater? And so I thought, well, maybe it is, or maybe it's something political. I don't know. So it kind of made me question what was going on. When I first saw it, it was just the brickwork, but then I started studying and I was like, oh, it's a lot going on here. So I thought that was kind of intriguing for me. Now, I don't know when you're just walking by the building if you're thinking all of that, but that was just my take on it. And that's why I picked this piece.
You're still muted, Bruce.
My apologies. Thank you, Michele. Our next speaker is Ken Finkel, who is a professor of history at Temple University, and from 1977 to 1994 served as curator of prints and photographs at the Library Company of Philadelphia. Ken?
What a great group of visual Philadelphia historians. That doesn't count toward my 2 minutes. A century ago, the Thomas Buck Hosiery company at York and Jasper Streets in Kensington was surrounded by dye works, carpet mills, hosiery mills, yarn manufacturers, woolen mills, a couple of beer brewers, and row houses as far as the eye could see. Philadelphia had 1/60th of the nation's population, but produced 1/20th of its manufacturers. The city produced more textiles than anywhere else, and Kensington was ground zero. According to a 1908 poster bragging about the city's production, Philadelphia could supply 2 pairs of socks to every man, woman, and child in the United States every year. That was 100 years ago. 10 years ago next week, an early morning fire was reported in this empty mill building. They quickly reached 5 alarms. High winds rained burning embers across the neighborhood. 6 houses were ignited. So was an adjacent furniture store. We knew this was going to happen, said the president of the East Kensington Neighbors Association. One by one, all the old textile mills in this neighborhood are burning down, and this city is not taking steps to deal with it. This building's owners had bought the place in 2008. They claimed they had plans for development, but no development happened. And by the time of the fire, they owed nearly $73,000 in back taxes and overdue utility fees. 2 firefighters died in that conflagration. Robert Neary, 60, and Daniel Sweeney, 25. They are remembered on a mural a few blocks away.
Thank you, Ken. Our next speaker is Pete Woodall. Pete is the project director at Hidden City, Philadelphia, and he was co-author of Finding the Hidden City.
There we go. Sorry. Thank you, Bruce. Good evening, everyone. You know, as a photographer, one of the best ways to learn is to see how another photographer captured a scene that you've photographed yourself. And especially when it's a place that you've really had trouble photographing. That's certainly true for the Cunningham building, which is pictured here. I photographed it back in 2012 for a Hidden City story by Dennis Carlisle. And that story, you know, went into the history of how the 1100 block of Chestnut east of, was sort of known as Piano Row, and it spread westward over to 13th. And the Cunningham Piano Building Company built one of the, probably the grandest of the buildings on Piano Row. Sorry, I have a dog that's sort of a little bit pushy down here. Anyway, so Cunningham is still around today, and they have a repair shop in Germantown and a retail store in the suburbs. But the current owner is actually the Church of Scientology and has been for more than a decade. What they're going to do with it is anybody's guess. It's still very vacant and no development plans have really been announced. But, you know, looking back at that 2012 article, I really see that my photo it wasn't a very good photo. I really just kind of caught the top half because photographing the whole thing involved compromises that I really didn't want to make. And most of those had to do with not wanting to sort of lean back in a way that the building sort of starts kind of wide and gets narrower and narrower as you go up. You know, I really like things to be nice and square, just like the architectural textbooks tell you to. You know, it's almost a compulsion for me. But, you know, there's a time and a place to be creative and to find a way to, you know, take a picture that really wouldn't look very good otherwise. I love how Jerome used the pillars of the Wanamaker building to frame the Cunningham building. And there's a way in which without that frame, the building would really just sort of float up there by itself in this sort of lonely and unimpressive way. But when you have those columns, it gives it this verticality and solidity, which really does justice to it. Thank you.
Thank you, Pete. Our next speaker is Sarah Weatherwax. Sarah is the Senior Curator of Graphic Arts at the Library Company of Philadelphia, where she has worked for 29 years.
Thanks, Bruce. This photograph appealed to me for both aesthetic and historical reasons. Compositionally, I like the dark geometric shapes, the empty rectangular windows, the smaller dark opening for an air conditioner, and even the dark circle on the fire hydrant all stood out to me. I love the juxtaposition between the "do not enter" traffic sign competing with what I guess may have been at one point a neon sign in the shape of an arrow that aggressively points patrons into the bar. The photo also appealed to me because of the story it tells about Philadelphia's changing urban landscape. The building's design was not strictly utilitarian when it was first constructed. There are patterns in the brickwork on the facade and decorative elements on the cornice. With its location at the corner of 17th and Huntington, the first story from very early on in the building's history, and maybe even as soon as it was constructed, was used for commercial purposes. What may have initially been occupied by a family-run shop serving the neighborhood has evolved into a bar by the time of this photograph, and one that has passed through many owners. Notice the several layers of letters that can be seen through the peeling paint on the arrow sign. Ownership is now proclaimed by the small, crudely painted name of Lois on the building's exterior. I don't know if there's an agreed upon definition of dive bar, but I think it's safe to say that this establishment was probably not a real asset to the neighborhood. The building looks sad and hopeless. I looked up this location on Google Maps and learned that as of 2019, the building still stands, but with even more signs of deterioration. The large arrow sign has been removed and Lois's name is painted over. Ownership is now claimed by Rat Kid via graffiti sprayed on the facade. The building was covered with for sale signs. So I would like to think that the future of this site holds more promise than the recent past, but I feel that that is far from certain. Thanks.
Thank you, Sarah. Our next speaker is Joe Labalito, who is a native of Northeast Philadelphia, and he is university photographer at Temple University, where he has worked for more than 30 years. Joe.
Hello, everybody. Thanks for having me. This has been really good to hear you guys. This particular image, photography has a way of, maybe it's the nostalgia of it, but it brings back memories right away. And for me, this picture, these are the neighborhoods that I grew up in. These are the neighborhoods that I also photographed in. Jerome's work, as soon as I saw it in the show, I was drawn to it immediately. We have a lot of common ground. And some of it was his work in Kensington and where the L goes by and some of his images. This particular image, I love the way we have talked already about a 4x5 view camera and the way it just comes straight on to you. Everything about the way he composed this just sits perfectly with me. The steps kind of break up the formal composition for me. And they're so heavy take up such a big chunk of the frame for me that I'm almost curious what those basements look like behind those steps. You know, if I start to think about what this house must look like inside, the basements have to be really big and really deep for those steps to be that high. The other interesting random thing about this, and Betsy touched on this earlier, that, you know, these cars come and go through the frame, and you just have random little pieces of graffiti and deteriorating step that just, I don't know, they almost look beautiful from further away. There's something really pleasing about this, even down to the diagonal stripes in the foreground. This is a photograph that I just loved as soon as I looked at it. And I will say, to Laura's point about nostalgia and bringing back memories, I literally pushed my friend's Mustang down Lehigh Avenue, right past this area, and maybe not this specific spot, but this area back in my misspent youth. And the day I saw this show, that came back to me immediately. It was like, oh my God, I can't believe I'm remembering that. I hadn't thought about him in 30 years. But when I saw this photograph, it came right back to me. So yeah, this Jerome show was great for me to see. If you haven't seen it, you should go. Again, black and white photography in a gallery. For me, that was really special. And it brought back great memories. Thank
you, Joe. Our next speaker is Mike Lewis. Mike is an American art historian, professor of art history at Williams College, and the architectural critic for the Wall Street Journal. His most recent book is Philadelphia Builds: Essays on Architecture.
Bruce, thanks. Bruce, thanks also for organizing this. It's terrific to see so many old and new friends in your roster. The Pennsylvania Academy of the Fine Arts is like an overbearing boar at a party. It grabs you by the lapels and won't stop talking at you, except here at the back where it finally shuts up. Here, above the student entrance, its voice drops to a whisper so soft you have to strain in order to hear it. In this mostly blank wall, in this passage of spatial silence, Frank Furness gives us a single carved flower. Most of us, I think, never give it a glance. We take it as a mere garnish. This is the sprig of parsley on the lamb chop. But of course, it's not a flower at all, or any kind of plant you've ever seen. It's three plants fused together in a hybrid. In the center is an aster, which means star, which is the name we give to a daisy, surrounded by, coiling around it, the frond of one single fern. And both daisy and fern emerge from the calla lily below, which must have been a shock to the calla lily, because yes, they spring forth from the sexual parts of the flower, from pistil and stamen, arising from the act of creation itself. The act of creating something new, something that had never before been seen. And isn't that just what you want from the art students who pass under it each day?
Thank you, Michael. Our next speaker is Jim Abbott. Jim is a photographer based in Philadelphia since 1982, and he's been engaged in freelance and fine art photography at all levels since then. His personal projects are long-term: the Benjamin Franklin Bridge, the Delaware Riverfront, the Berlin landscape of memory, and the landscape before me, Cape Cod. He was an artist in residence at the Cherry Street Pier from fall of 2018 through January of 2022, and he still maintains a small studio there on the pier. Jim?
Good evening, and thank you for this invitation. Hopefully you can hear me. Okay, you can hear me. What drew Jerome to this site? This Italianate building looks like a lonely giant tree in a clear-cut forest, yet somehow it still secures the corner. The time of day and angle of the sun accentuates the volume and features the brownstone. The ramp entrance and number of windows announce its once public nature. The perimeter chain link fence tells us times have changed. The public is no longer invited. Although titled House Cumberland and Hancock, it is in fact the former David Farragut Public School, built in 1873. Farragut was a decorated Civil War admiral who gave the order during the Battle of Mobile Bay, damn the torpedoes, full speed ahead. The architect was Louis Elser, who was also superintendent of buildings for the school district. The building is on the National Register of Historic Places. I find post-study and research of image content is one of the edifying aspects of the medium. One tries to better understand the content and subject of what you have taken the time and effort to capture and share with others. It adds layers of understanding, reveals your mistakes, and influences choices when you next set out. Now, I don't imagine Jerome was slowly cruising along in his Saab thinking, oh, look at that 1873 Italianate brownstone school by Louis Elser. I can, however, imagine him slowing to a stop when he saw this towering, proud old building still standing in a formerly dense row house neighborhood. Its presence in the clear late afternoon light speaks of another time, a survivor of our urban evolution. I rather think it is often the light on a form that first triggers a photographer's attention. When setting up in a city with a view camera, the ever-present telephone poles are often your first challenge. Utility pole on the corner, an immediate challenge. If you move the camera a foot to the right, the utility pole blocks the flow to the entrance and stacked windows. A foot to the left breaks the roof line to the triangular peaked roof. So the camera was placed so the pole will overlap the corner where the west facade meets the south facade, thereby minimizing it and flattening the space a little. Analog film photographers had no magic wand or Photoshop. So when focused on what is in front of the camera, they learned to use the unmovable frontal obstructions to a subject. You see this in many of Jerome's photographs, where trees, utility poles, wires, and shadows are effectively used as framing devices to complete the composition. Finally, I think the lens was shifted up, eliminating some foreground and bringing you right to the subject. This lens movement records more sky, enhances verticality, and allows the wires to form an imaginary aerial X marks the spot. Those are my thoughts on this photograph.
Thank you, Jim. Tess, have we heard from Nikhil?
No.
Okay. Well then, how about Oscar? Has he come with us?
It looks like no.
Or Aaron?
No.
Okay. Well then, Sean, we come to you. Sean O'Rourke is a practicing architect in Philadelphia and the author of the incredible essays in Philadelphia Portraits of the City with Jerome Lukowicz. He lives with his family in the 30th Ward. Sean.
Thank you, Bruce. And I can't help but compliment you on the sequencing, and you'll understand this, but I think I bookend with Laura's beginning well. A garage, a parish house with a London plane tree in front, the church and diner on a T Street in Philadelphia, 10th and Ludlow. I can't help but think Alan Greenberger wrote an op-ed piece many years ago celebrating a new parking garage at 20th and Walnut Street because its multiple stories of cars are hidden behind an opaque wall of fake Renaissance proportions and large grills. The gist was, no one wants to see cars in the city. This is a good way to hide them. It looked like a prison to me. Every time I see one of these older garages, like the one on the right, many of them along Sampson Street, I smile at their openness. Sure, not much good comes from parking cars at the sidewalk, but to be able to look up and see cars parked, floating above like colorful merchandise on a counter shelf makes me smile. Years ago, my wife's first job as an architect upon arriving in Philadelphia was drawing this William Strickland Gothic Revival church at John Milner's office so it could gain historical certification. Her last job was convincing some of her bosses at Jefferson that it's a valuable building. his Merchant Exchange Building in Society Hill, and the United States Naval Asylum on Grays Ferry Avenue, where I live close to. We are lucky to have them all. They are classics in this city. In Blacksburg, Virginia, where I was first taught to look at urbanity, I saw a small gridded town of 16 blocks. The grid sometimes stopped at T streets capped by a building, sometimes significant ones and sometimes not. When I came to Philadelphia, the original grid and its blocks seemed to go on forever, to Reading, Lancaster, Harrisburg. Ironically, William Penn's vision of a green country town was usurped by developers who filled in the large blocks with streets to promote its parceling. It is so much fun to walk the grid of Center City and peek down these tertiary streets of little regard. Some of these signature buildings are lost in our peripheral vision as one walks the primary streets in Philadelphia, until one looks down these alleys and side streets, surprised by a vista of uncommon stature. A diner, nothing more commonplace at one time in Philadelphia, a place that is always open, a place that welcomes the singular eater. Jerome's favorite diner meal was cream chip beef on toast. It was so gross. Any time of day I ate with him, I wanted breakfast washed down with a large plastic glass of grapefruit juice. What an intersection.
Well, thank you so much, Sean. As a big fan of cream chip beef on toast, that's something that I have in common with Jerome. You're too kind to mention that that the sequencing was well thought out. As my mother used to say, it was more good luck than good management on my part. But one thing that I did know, that with this particular cast of friends and experts, I knew that we would have a wonderful session tonight, and I would like to thank you all for that. At this point, I'll turn it back over to Beth to see if there are any questions that have come in, and I will mute myself for now, and Tess, I will follow Tess and Beth, I'll follow your instructions.
Great. Well, I hope if anybody has any questions for any particular member of the panel or the panel in general, that you will put those in either the chat or the Q&A. But first, we had one request. Bruce, would you be willing to go through the slides, or Tess can move us through the slides, and would you please just identify the location of the buildings? And you'll have to unmute. Sorry.
I just saw that Nikhil had just joined us. Perhaps we could go to
Absolutely.
slide 15. Okay.
Yes, and then you can identify. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. I apologize. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Great. I apologize for my lateness. We got pulled into session late on a different, anyway, you understand. Just returned from Harrisburg. So it's a real honor to be here with you, Bruce, and Sean and everyone. Sorry to interpose myself at this late hour and kind of after the ceremony had concluded, but I appreciate the opportunity to speak about this photo. There were so many to choose from, but this photo of Hopkinson House from the playground courtyard of McCall School. It's something that is just on a regular walk for me. It's actually pretty close to the Athenaeum. It's also one of the, I think this is like a great view of Society Hill as it was dreamed of at one point, and also what, in some way it kind of did not become. The Hopkinson House is this great sort of step ladder of a building. Oscar Stonerov went, in this kind of like arc of great work from the 30s to this point. And this view from McCall, I think it is one of the best because it catches the light best, the sense of volume, the kind of sheer ornamental acuteness of the facade is really well captured. But then from a school that's from the early 20th century, and then the low slung row of just in front of the building, which is really what Society Hill actually became known for, despite the presence of a number of high modernist towers. There was a point when after the 60s, the the neighborhood began to gentrify quite heavily. McCall School, though it has a large presence of minority students by containing Chinatown in its catchment, it was one of the first schools to teach English as a second language, became part of that gentrification in a way. And as part of it, actually, the number of kind of of high rises and the like failed to materialize to the degree that they were in that moment in the 50s and 60s. And so you actually see in this picture all that the neighborhood is, all that it once might have been, all that it sort of was meant to be, and what it has kind of settled into. And I see that with great fondness for the neighborhood and great fondness for all of those particular visions. And I appreciate this photograph for what it does in that moment. So that's why I wanted to choose this one. But I think Sean wrote much more eloquently about it, and I appreciate the opportunity to speak to it.
Thank you, Nikhil. I didn't have an opportunity to introduce you, but we do appreciate the time and the effort that you put into this from your day job. For those of you who might not know, Nikhil is a state senator, and are you in Harrisburg now?
I just got back. That's what delayed me, unfortunately.
So we appreciate your joining us, and we appreciate your service.
Thank you. I appreciate the your work of the Athenaeum. As people may know, I was an architecture critic and journalist before this, so I have a planning writer. So I have a great admiration for this book and for the work of the Athenaeum, its collections and Bruce, your work as an archivist and maintainer of that. And so it's anyway much appreciated. Great honor to be here.
You want me to go back to the beginning and we can just quickly say where each picture is, Bruce?
Sure. That's fine.
Sorry for the crazy.
That's all right. So this is the Witherspoon building at the corner of Juniper and Walnut Street, built for the Presbyterian Board of Sabbath School Publication. Just down the street or around the corner was the Baptist Publication Society. Philadelphia was a major printing center, and churches were major clients of printing. Next. Well, this is at Broad and Ellsworth, I believe. Laura just jump in, but it's South Broad Street. This is on Girard Avenue near 6th Street. The building is still there. The signs are pretty much gone, but the building is still there. This is, as yet, at least to me, an unidentified row house alley in Northeast Philadelphia. Sean, you may know more closely than I, but this could be a lot of places in the lower Northeast.
Yeah, and I'm not telling.
Okay. Joe identified this. The building itself had been on North 8th Street in the Logan Triangle. Broad and Wharton Street was the Sinatra mural. And this was at I believe 12th and Willow Street, maybe 11th and Willow. The Pico generating station, the steam plant. By the way, the Athenaeum gets its steam from that city steam loop, which had been Pico and then Viola and now Victory. So we're heated that way. Thank you. This is the 1400 block of Chestnut Street. The front and center is the American Baptist Publication Society, but just to the right there is Will Price's Jacob Reed Men's Store, which is a great survivor. And then in the left hand side is the back side of the land title building, and on the right hand side is the Packard building. A wonderful block. The Plays and Players, which is on Delancey Street, I think the 1700 block of Delancey, the theater. And Jasper and
It looks like it's about the 2400 block.
Okay. It's not too far from the L. You can see you can see that in the background. And Ken, thank you for that tribute to the fallen firefighters. 17th and Huntington Street, the lowest bar, or is it the Rat Kill bar, or was it Kill Rat? Yeah. So this is the 2000 block of East Lehigh Avenue, just a couple of blocks from Kensington Avenue. And Joe, if I could propose there that these steps are not original. But that the grade of the street was lowered, having to do with the railroad tracks directly across the street from these houses. Look at the Port Richmond rail line that carry the coal there, and my guess is that the grade of the street was changed at some point, and in a very rare instance, they put some pretty ornate steps to do that. And I don't think that the basements got any deeper than they had been originally, but those were very grand staircases.
Thank you.
Well, enough said. I don't want to step on the poetry. Thanks, Mike. This is at Hancock and Cumberland Streets in East Kensington. And the Hopkinson House. I also love this this particular view from the schoolyard. It's got such great scale. I can hear the kids playing and screaming in the yard there, and the wonderful sound of children just getting their steam out and just having a great time before they go back into school again. And I love the way that it goes from the flat prairie of the concrete schoolyard to the 3-story houses on Spruce Street to the skyscraper behind. The St. Stephen's Church is at 11th and Ludlow Street, and the Grand Slam Deli and food market is now a Japanese restaurant there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bruce. And Laura fills in the mural and the gas station are at Broad and Wharton. So we have some comments and some questions. Jeffrey says, thank you all for this treasure trove of photos and the fascinating architectural tour of the city. He lives in New York City and is looking forward to his next visit. And Jeffrey, if you can get here before the end of May, you'll be able to see this exhibit in person. Michael thanks Laura for the poetry that began the show. Karen, yes, this recording will be available on our YouTube site. And it may take a couple of days, but we'll get it up there. And from Canada, who has not visited Philadelphia, is grateful for this wonderful program. And I hope you will come and visit Philadelphia after seeing these photos. We have an amazing city. Carol Ann, it's such a great idea. It's been great to see the speakers along with the photos. Penny, great fun. Thank you. WJC is wondering why the year of each of the photos is in the exhibit room is not provided.
If I could answer that, in that they were not specified in the catalog, and Jerome did work over the images appear from about 1995 through the mid 2000s, but rather than guess and have lots of things that just say circa and put misinformation, I put the titles as they were identified in the catalog.
So I think that can add a little bit of fun for folks to try to guess what years the photo made. Some of them are timeless and some are very much of a time and place. I hope you all will come and view the exhibits. And if you haven't seen it, if you have, I suspect all of you will be looking in yet another way at these photos. We see the cover of the book here. The Athenaeum does have copies of Philadelphia Portraits of the City, which has photographs by Jerome, including many that are not included in the exhibit, and some thoughts and reflections by Sean O'Rourke. It's really an incredibly beautiful book. So if you're interested in purchasing a copy, come on in or give us a call. If you're up in Canada and you want one, we'll figure out how to get one to you. We thank you all so much for coming tonight to our program and look forward to seeing you again in person and online. Have a wonderful evening. And thank you to all of our panelists. That was wonderful.
Thank you, Tess.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Thanks, guys.
Everyone wave
Thank
bye.
you. Y'all were wonderful.
All right, good evening, everyone.
Have a
Thank
great
you
evening,
so much.
Michelle.
Bye.
Bye.